Fighting Blindness Canada's Viewpoint is a virtual education series that brings you the latest in vision research presented by health experts from across Canada. The webinar you're about to watch is a recording. To learn more about the research we fund and upcoming webinars and events, please visit our website at fightingblindness.ca. This Viewpoint webinar is proudly presented by Bayer and supported by Abbvie, Apellis, Beacon Therapeutics, Janssen, MeriaGTx, Novartis and Roche. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and share your thoughts with us in the comment section below.
So if you are a regular Viewpoint attendee, my partner in crime today needs no introduction. So a big welcome to Fighting Blindness Canada's Director of Research and Mission Programs, Dr. Larissa Moniz. Thanks for joining me, Larissa. I'm excited for our chat.
Me too. Thank you, Morgan.
Awesome. So let's just start about, this is something we've talked about probably the last several years we've done this, but it's been a really exciting year here in Canada for the gene therapy Luxturna. And can you start us off today by telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a bit of a journey, and I'm sure many of the people on the call have heard us talking about sort of Luxturna has come to Canada, and we've had Health Canada approval, or now it is being approved by CADTH. And so it's been a very long process. It was originally approved by Health Canada back in 2020, which was extremely exciting. However, then there were so many other steps the drug had to go through to get sort of approval to be publicly funded by each province. And that finally happened in 2023. And in 2023, we finally started seeing many patients getting treated. In 2022, there were a couple of patients who were able to get funding through their private insurance to get treatment. But really in 2023, there have been dozens of patients who have been able to get treatment, which is really, really exciting. And we've heard from some of the patients. I know, Morgan, you talked to Jack McCormick, who received treatment last year, and he spoke at a podcast as well as one of our Viewpoint events. So sort of highly recommend if anybody wants to hear a little bit more about his personal experience before he had treatment and his experience getting Luxturna, to check out the podcast or the Viewpoint. But it's been really wonderful hearing from community members who have been able to receive treatment and can talk about what it meant to them. So they're starting to see improvements in their vision right away, some of which were potentially unexpected. They weren't sure if it would work for them. And they're also really hopeful that it means that their current vision will maintain for longer. So really exciting news for the community, but I think it was also a really big lesson for us about how long the process took. And we're hopeful that because a lot of these details have been worked out now, and some of those details were really, I would say, logistic. It was when we were talking to some of the clinicians who were in charge of going to be in charge of delivering it. It was really them talking with their hospitals, with the Ministry of Health, with the pharmacies, trying to make sure all these details came together, because it's a really, really, really expensive treatment. And so even something as what seems as simple as getting aliquots of the drug, it takes a lot of pre-thought to make sure you're not wasting anything, and that it's going to be done safely, it's going to be done efficiently. So yeah, it's been a long process, but it's now being delivered in Alberta, in Ontario, and in Montreal and Quebec. And there are patients in other provinces who are traveling. Currently, as far as I know, most of the patients have been traveling to Alberta, but there might be patients traveling to other provinces as well as we go forward. And I would say another thing that was interesting to me about the whole process was sort of the value of the patient registry, which I know we talk about quite a bit, but it really actually, to me, became really evident. Because the patient registry, this is a database where if you have an inherited retinal disease, you can enter it, and we don't store it. It's medically stored at different sites across Canada. For instance, a Sick Kids, or in Alberta, there's in Nova Scotia, Quebec, Vancouver. And if a new treatment comes, or if there are clinical trials available, patients can be contacted, and the registry allowed some of these sites to contact their patients once Luxturna was available to schedule them for appointments.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see the registry sort of start to come into its own as treatments become available, and we're able to play a role in helping to identify people that may benefit from this research and these treatments. So I see we already have a question in the Q&A from Joseph asking about medical treatments and procedures for wet macular degeneration. So Joe, you've read my mind. I thought we could get into maybe a little bit more specifically about some of the research this year. So are there any sort of new treatments for age-related macular degeneration? We've heard some things in the news about dry AMD. What about wet? What's going on in both of those forms of AMD?
Absolutely. So there's two types of age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. There's wet and there's dry. Most patients are first diagnosed with dry AMD, and then for some patients, they will only ever have dry. And for some of them, it will maybe cause sort of small amounts of vision loss, but not a lot. But if it progresses, it can progress to two forms. It can progress to an advanced form of dry AMD, which is called geographic atrophy, which I will touch on some new treatments in a bit. And it can also advance to a quite serious form of wet age-related macular degeneration. And for wet AMD, there have been some treatments available for a number of years now. The main one is a type of drug called an anti-VEGF, which is vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF. And these are injections that are given directly into the eye. They're intravitreal injections. And they help slow or stop the growth of blood vessels that form in wet AMD. And these blood vessels, when they form, they can leak fluid into the eye, and that's what causes vision loss. So right now, the anti-VEGF drugs really are the gold standard, and they have done, I think, a really remarkable job of helping to slow the progression for many people. However, we know that, one, it doesn't work for everybody, and secondly, it can be quite, I would say, a burden on community members who have to go, every few months to get an injection. And so what a lot of the companies are looking at, they're looking at different types of drugs, but they're also looking at ways to make the injections further apart. So are there different types of drugs that can maybe either last longer, and so you don't have to go in quite as frequently for injections? And so in 2023, I would say that was sort of some of the bigger news that happened. Was 2 new anti-VEGF drugs were approved by Health Canada. One of them is called Vabysmo, and it means that you can go a longer time between injections. The other one is sort of a bigger concentration of a drug called Eylea. So Eylea is already being used. This is a new formulation of Eylea, and that also allows you to go longer time between injections. Vabysmo has been approved by Health Canada, got a recommendation from CADIT, and is now actually being delivered in a number of provinces. Not all Canadians have equal access to it yet, so that's something that we're working on to make sure all Canadians have access to these new drugs as they come. And then you have the other one, which is 8 milligram Eylea. That is still going through some of the price negotiations now, but we hope it is available to Canadians in 2024. So I would say those are sort of the 2 big ones for wet AMD, and there's a lot of other things happening, I would say, in the clinical trial sphere. So there's things such as trying to put a little device potential in your eye that can release the anti-VEGF more slowly. There are some trials happening for gene therapy for anti-VEGF, and they're all in relatively late stage clinical trials. So it's possible in 2024 and beyond, we'll start to hear more about it. But I would say those are sort of the main things happening. There's some stem cell therapy happening as well, but those are a little bit further out. In terms of geographic atrophy, which is the advanced form of dry AMD, it also is a pretty exciting year because 2 different drugs for dry AMD have been approved by the FDA in the United States. So that's the FDA's similar to our Health Canada, where they approve drugs to make sure that they are safe for patient use. So they've been approved. They're starting to be used in the US. We currently don't have them in Canada. They still haven't come through our approval process, although we're hoping it happens in 2024. And they actually haven't been approved in Europe either. So currently the US is the main country where they are available. But we are hoping that they arrive soon. And so we'll definitely talk more about them as we sort of get through the process and as they are available. But what they do, they both sort of work the same way, or similar way, not the same way. They are both also injections into the eye. So you'd be getting them maybe every month, maybe a little bit less frequently. And they stop a pathway in the eye called the complement pathway. So this is part of the immune system in the eye, which gets activated in geographic atrophy. And the clinical trials have shown that by sort of stopping some of this pathway in different ways, you can reduce the progression of that lesion, of that atrophy that happens.
Yeah, it's been very exciting. We've had lots of questions for our health information line about when these drugs are coming to Canada, and as you mentioned, it's quite usually a lengthy process to get it covered. And the U.S. usually always goes first, and then Europe and Canada sort of follow. So we're hopeful we'll see some progress on that next year for sure. So thinking about, so we talked about AMD. How about inherited retinal dystrophies, or IRDs? Are there any new clinical trials or results from clinical trials that have been really exciting for you in the past year?
Yeah, I saw there was a question in the chat about clinical trials for retinitis pigmentosa, and there absolutely are a lot of clinical trials happening right now. They're actually too many for me to really talk about, so there's a few things I will mention. First of all, we have an updated clinical trials page. So I know Morgan has put a lot of work into this, making sure that we are keeping track of all the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials that are taking place for inherited retinal diseases. And we also have some innovative treatments for age-related macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy as well. So definitely go to our website, fightingblindness.ca /clinical/trials, but Morgan will send out the link because that was quite a mouthful.
In the chat too right now. So
fantastic. So that's a really good way. If you have an inherited retinal disease, you can look at it, and we have listed both the type of treatment it is. So is it a drug? Is it a stem cell treatment? Is it a gene therapy? And if it is a gene-specific treatment, we've also mentioned it there. So you can sort of identify, for instance, for retinitis pigmentosa, we know a lot of different genes can cause retinitis pigmentosa, and so you'll be able to see what gene is there. And yes, there's definitely stuff for Stargardt. So maybe I could touch on that a little bit later, because we have had a few questions about that as well. So in terms of some maybe particularly noteworthy things that happened in 2023, I'll say I think we're tracking over 30 active clinical trials, which is really exciting. And that is over achromatopsia, choroideremia, Leber congenital amaurosis, Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, retinitis pigmentosa, Stargardt disease, Usher syndrome, X-linked RP, and X-linked retinoschisis. So I think those were the clinical trials that we identified. Looking at some of the more sort of gene-specific clinical trials out there, so this is largely gene therapies, but not exclusively, but largely gene therapies. Something that I thought was sort of noteworthy this year was that a company called AGTC, which had a number of clinical trials going, it essentially sort of a new company formed, taking some assets from AGTC and some assets from some other places. So we have a new company called Beacon Therapeutics, and it is continuing some clinical trials in X-linked retinitis pigmentosa. And it is also going to be starting some work in cone rod dystrophy, specifically with the CDHR1 gene. And this was work that was started by a really sort of preeminent gene therapy researcher, Dr. Robert McLaren at the University of Oxford. And he's also a co-founder and advisor for Beacon Therapeutics. So looking forward to hearing more about some of those trials, especially the X-linked RP ones, which are at, I think, stage 2 or 3. So they're sort of at later stages right now. We also have, I thought this was an interesting update that I heard this year. It was an update from a company called Dara, which was giving an update on a phase 2 clinical trial they had. And so they were looking at a new treatment that was specific for mutations in the RHO gene. And so a lot of times when RHO, it's a very common mutation in retinitis pigmentosa and other inherited retinal diseases, a lot of times the mutations cause misfolding of the protein, which can be really, really toxic to cells. So this trial was actually not a gene therapy, even though it's sort of gene specific because it's for individuals who have a RHO mutation, but it was actually injections of a drug called methotrexate. And so that sort of helps the cell deal with this toxic misfolded protein. And what they found was that the treatment was safe for the patients. I think it was a small study. I think there were like 6 or 7 patients in it. But it was safe, and best corrected visual acuity and low light visual acuity actually improved for some patients. So that was really exciting. And that was a phase 2 trial. And now they're moving into a larger phase 2 or 3 trial, which will be interesting to see. Something else, and this was actually a more recent update. It was not a new trial, but it was trying to address the question of, is it a good idea to take vitamin A supplements? And I know this is a question we hear sometimes about, I have retinitis pigmentosa or another inherited retinal disease. Should I be taking a supplement? Would it help my vision? And a lot of this comes from a study that was done, I think back in the 2000s, looking at patients from about 10 years ago. And in the study, there were sort of 2, I think, main conclusions. One was that people who had inherited retinal disease or retinitis pigmentosa should not take vitamin E. And the second was that patients who took supplements of vitamin A had a small improvement in vision. This data was sort of reanalyzed, looking at sort of more data and longer term data by Drs. Eric Pierce and Dr. Jason Commander, who are really prominent researchers at Mass Eye and Near. And they actually found that there was no impact of taking vitamin A. So it doesn't look like taking vitamin A supplements helps you if you have retinitis pigmentosa. So this is something where if you're considering taking supplements, you should always talk to your eye doctor before starting a supplement, because you want to make sure that they're safe and that they're not having any other consequences. And I would say the last one that I was like particularly excited about was the sort of completion of the phase 1 trial for Kiora, which is a photo switch. So this is sort of similar to optogenetics. It's gene agnostic, so it could be potentially for anybody who has retinal degeneration, although currently the trials in retinitis pigmentosa and choroideremia. And the company announced that they had enrolled all the patients for their phase 1b trial, and they haven't released the data yet, so that will likely come out in 2024. So sort of looking forward to seeing how safe, hopefully it was very safe, and hopefully they will move on to a larger trial if it is considered to be a safe treatment.
Do you want to, I know we were going to wait till later, but do you want to mention, I noticed Mike in the chat, and then we had a question come in through email as well about Stargardt. Do you want to provide a little update on Stargardt now?
Absolutely. So for Stargardt's, again, I really highly recommend you go to the clinical trials page, because there are a number of trials there. So there are both gene-specific, again, treatments and non-gene specific treatments. The majority of patients who have Stargardt's disease have mutations in a gene called ABCA4. However, it is, from like a technical point of view, actually really hard to work with to develop a gene therapy, because it's really, really big. And so it's really hard to basically package it, to get it into the little viral vector. Viral vectors can only hold genes of a certain size. If it's really big, it's hard to get it into the cells. So currently, we don't have any clinical trials, as far as I know, that are at clinical trial level for a gene specific therapy for ABCA4, although I know there's a lot of work happening with it. So I imagine in the coming years we'll hear a lot more about things moving in preclinical or even to clinical trials. However, there are a number of trials that are trying to reduce some of the side effects that happen when you have an ABCA4 mutation. So for instance, I was mentioning how in geographic atrophy, some of the new drugs are targeting the complement pathway. There's also actually some trials trying to target the complement pathway to reduce immune activation in Stargardt's disease. There's some trials for that. There's some other trials that are looking at different drugs that can maybe reduce the toxic accumulation of vitamin A byproducts. And this is a side effect of ABCA4 mutations, and it leads to damage in the retina. So one that very, very recently put out some results was from a phase 2 trial for a drug called, I don't know how to pronounce it, but I think it's tinlarebant, something like that. And it was a phase 2 trial. There were 12 patients in the trial. And the important thing was the drug so far seems to be safe. And patients who were taking it seemed to have slightly reduced retinal atrophy. And the majority of patients, they also said their visual acuity stabilized. So it was a small trial, only 12 patients, but very promising. So looking forward to sort of hearing more and seeing if it moves into a larger trial for that. Yeah, so I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking, Morgan. So I was wondering maybe if you wanted to tell us a little bit about sort of some of your highlights from this year, maybe research, but also your education programs, your wonderful programs that you run.
Yeah, thanks, Larissa. It's hard. I've been thinking about this question today, and we've had such a busy year in education. We've kind of come full back into in-person events, and we've had in-person viewpoints both in Calgary and Toronto. We had young leaders in person, so it's been a really exciting year to be back out in the community and getting to meet with people and learning from all of these fantastic clinicians and researchers that have come out to um, share their research with us. So I thought it'd be kind of fun. I've got my top 5, not to play favorites because I love all of the stuff we put out this year, but I've got my top 5 talks from the past year, and I will send a little list maybe out with our email later in case you're new here or you've missed some things this year. I would say these are probably the highlights. Um, and this doesn't include Viewpoint Toronto because those recordings aren't out yet. As Larissa mentioned, we had a great chat with Jack McCormick, and that'll be available in January. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so my top 5 from this year, when we went to Calgary in the spring, we were very lucky to have Dr. Leslie Everett join us from Casey Eye Institute in Portland, Oregon, which is a very well-known site of ophthalmic research. And she works for a team that is doing some of I would say pretty cutting edge stem cell research. And she came and she talked to us about stem cells, and she explained it just in a really wonderful way, very understandable, sort of where we're at right now with that research and where we might be going in the future. So highly recommend that one. In the AMD space, we've had 2 this year that I thought were really, really great. In February, we had kind of an update on clinical trials. So just some of these questions that were asked today, and Larissa talked a little bit about, where we've come this year. But if you are really interested in the clinical trials for age-related macular degeneration, highly recommend that one from February with Dr. Tom Shido, who, again, really great at explaining very complicated concepts in a way that us without a medical degree or a PhD can understand, which I think is really always great. And then the other, there was just recently in November, which was Diabetes Awareness Month, we had a great webinar about anti-VEGF treatment specifically with Dr. Bernie Hurley. And those, of course, those treatments are used for people who have diabetic retinopathy, as well as age-related macular degeneration and other conditions too, like retinal vein occlusions, anything that's causing sort of that excessive bleeding in the eye. So that was really interesting to hear about all of those different treatments, as well as some of the new research that's happening. So another one I highly recommend. And then over in our young leader space, and the great thing about these recordings is that even though our young leaders are typically the audience at these events, I think the talks that come out of them are so great. And we've had some really fantastic speakers this year. And now that they live on YouTube, they're open to anyone. So I highly recommend them, even if you're not under the age of 35. So in our Toronto Summit this year, we were really lucky to have a Dave Brown come and join us as a keynote. If you're not familiar with Dave Brown, he is a media personality and the host of AMI's Now with Dave Brown. And his journey was really interesting to hear about his story and sort of how far he's come and, some of the great things that have happened along the way, some of his challenges. It was definitely a fan favorite at our Young Leaders Summit. And then last but not least, we also did in our Young Leaders program this year a little webinar series over the summer called Career Connections, where we, in each sort of episode or event, we talk to someone about their career path. And I think they're just really great for anyone who is looking for a job, looking to change their job, thinking their career. These are just really fantastic sessions. And we did one, there's 4 of them in total. They're all great, but my favorite was with actor Bruce Horak, who you may have seen on Star Trek. He's also done a lot of stage. He's an artist, really cool guy. So definitely encourage you to check out that webinar because that was a really good one. Yeah, that's 5. And I had a hard time narrowing it down. There's been a lot of great things. Larissa mentioned the podcast too, definitely an honorable mention. I absolutely love putting together those 3 episodes. And if you haven't had a chance to check them out, there's some great content there. So that's been
And
my highlights.
yeah,
Oh,
there was a question for you about young leaders, Morgan. Do you have any ideas where young
oh.
leaders will be in 2024? I was wondering if you want to give a sneak peek.
Yeah, that's a great question. So our first event is going to be in April in Vancouver. So we will be having a small young leaders gathering out there in Vancouver in April, which will be really exciting. And then we're kind of still developing the rest of our program, but there will be more to come. I will say that our mentorship program is about to hit the ground running. So I think just today with our e-news, there's an article in there about our mentorship program, and it's become really successful over the past 3 years, and it just keeps growing. It's such a phenomenal program. I'm really proud of what we're doing with it and all of our mentors for donating their time and expertise. So how it works is that we accept applications for both mentor and mentee. They're open now through the end of January. And we pair young people under the age of 35 with a community mentor, maybe in their same sort of career path, but also we look at things like just general kind of personality, learning styles, interests. We've kind of really worked on this process to make sure that we're getting really good matches. And I think we've had pretty good success. And then the mentor and mentee sort of have an opportunity to meet together throughout the year, all virtually on Zoom, to chat about a variety of different topics. We provide in-depth resource guides and conversation starters and just one-on-one support. Myself and Jackie Rosen, who many of you may know, also in education, we support all of our mentors and mentees through this journey through the year. So if you're interested in becoming either a mentor or a mentee or know somebody, please spread the word. And as I said, applications are up now, and they will be open until January 19th. So, and if you have any questions, you can always email us at that education@fightingblindness.ca email. We'll be happy to help you out. Oh. So,
And I was going to say, we are also just alongside young leaders. There's also going to be a viewpoint in Vancouver around the same time. And so more details to come. But April, anybody out in the BC area or anybody out in who wants a little trip out to BC in April, come join us.
I will say the last 2 times that I've been out to Vancouver have been in April for a viewpoint, and it has always been miserable and snowy and gross in Toronto. And we get out to Vancouver and there's like tulips blooming and trees, and it's a good idea. Join us out there. It's a really nice time of year. Yes, I was going to mention that at the end. We are definitely planning on being out there in April, so that's going to be our first in-person event next year, which will be really exciting. So, our fearless director of research, can we hear some about our FBC funded research? What's been going on in the last year for those projects?
Yeah, we know we had another sort of, I would say, banner year for funding research. We're funding, I think it's $2.6 million in 2023, which is a phenomenal amount. And, really thanks to our donors for allowing us to do this, to be funding innovative research across the spectrum of eye diseases. And one of the really large programs that we launched this year was a grant program called the Transformative Research Awards. So this was us trying to provide researchers who had a really sort of a well-developed research proposal and to give them multi-year funding. So these are 5-year awards. Applicants could apply for up to $1.2 million. And in the end, we gave out 2 grants for a total of $1.7 million in research funding. And both the projects are really, really interesting and really exciting, sort of very, very different. The first is for a researcher called Dr. Marius Ueffing. He's at the University of Tübingen in Germany, and he is looking for a way to develop a new drug therapy to treat inherited retinal diseases. In the beginning, he's currently looking at retinitis pigmentosa, but trying to develop a drug that can be used for many different types of mutations. And so he's actually also looking at a process that takes place in cells, which is this problem with protein folding. I mentioned it before with some people who have mutations in Rho, there can be problems with protein folding. It happens with many other mutations as well. And it really, really stresses out the cell. It's as if you can sort of imagine if there was like a garbage strike, I guess, and the sort of the garbage builds up, it can clog things. It's the cells really don't like it. It can damage them. And so he's also looking at drug therapy that can hopefully reduce some of the stress in the cell, help the photoreceptor cells live longer, hopefully preserve vision for longer. And while this is not gene specific, it means it could be used potentially for many, many different individuals with different types of mutations. So he is trying to finish up some work that will help him move this potential drug into clinical trials. The second award went to Dr. Luis Alarcon-Martinez. He's in the Center for Eye Research in Melbourne, I believe. Center for Eye Research Australia. I'm pretty sure it's in Melbourne, definitely in Australia. And he is collaborating with Dr. Keith Martin, also at the Center for Eye Research in Australia, as well as with Dr. Adriana De Paulo at the University of Montreal. And they are studying glaucoma. In particular, what he and his previous mentor, Dr. De Paulo, found was that there are these cells that wrap around the optic nerve, and there are these little connections between these cells, these pericytes, and they break in glaucoma. And he's linked this breakage of these cells, or these parts of cells, to sort of an oxygen deprivation that could happen in glaucoma. And it's been known for quite a while that there is this oxygen dysfunction in glaucoma, but it wasn't really clear why it was caused, or even if it was important, like maybe it was just an artifact. But he is going to be studying this further. It's really, really exciting, and sort of potentially gives us this whole new understanding of what some of the potential causes of glaucoma could be. And hopefully some of this information will help us develop better treatments for glaucoma as well. So we really look forward. These are just the beginning of these projects. They're multi-year projects, but we'll definitely keep our community updated as we sort of get some progress from them and hear more about the results of these projects. So that was like a really big one. We also just finished our Eye on the Cure Awards. So that is sort of, I would say, an unconventional research award program where we get 5 finalists. This time it was early career investigators, some trainees, some just starting their careers, get them to pitch their ideas to sort of the lay public as well as our Academy of Judges. And then both between the judges as well as the people's vote, we award prizes. So we had some really, really interesting and engaging researchers this year. Their stories were so wonderful. They told us why they were inspired to be part of vision research. They told us about their projects. So really highly recommend that people go watch this on our website, or I think it's Fighting Blindness Canada, Eye on the Cure. So that is something definitely to be watched. And then we also finally awarded some new Clinician-Scientist Emerging Leader Awards. So this is an award we've been doing since 2016, where we have awards specifically for ophthalmologists or optometrists who are in training and are trying to incorporate research into their careers. And so we awarded 3 new awards. I think we're up to a total of 13 awardees so far, which is really great. And I know, Morgan, I think you had a chance to sit down and speak with some of them. So are we going to hear from some of our awardees now?
Yes, absolutely. So I have a short video. I've just recorded this over the last week, chatting with each of the 3 winners, talking about their projects. So let's have a listen to that.
I'm so pleased today that we can introduce you all to the 3 winners of the 2023 Clinician-Scientist Emerging Leader Awards. These awards are helping to build the pipeline of ophthalmology research in Canada. Clinician-Scientists help to translate laboratory research into the clinic and help bring clinical trials to Canadian patients. We have 3 fantastic projects that are being funded this year, and all 3 of those scientists are here with us today to tell us a little bit more about their projects. So if we could just start, can you all introduce yourselves, please?
Hello, my name is Ehsan Misaghi, and I'm an MD PhD student at the University of Alberta, My research involves the medical genetics and cell biology of inherited retinal degenerations. So we look at the patient mutations that cause certain inherited retinal degenerations, and we use stem cell-derived retinal pigment epithelium cells to look at those mutations a little bit further and identify what those genes do.
I'm Matt Quinn. I'm a neuro-ophthalmologist currently practicing in Ottawa, and I recently finished my training after doing fellowship here in Ottawa, and before that I was in Kingston for my ophthalmology residency. And yeah, currently I have really a full-time neuro-ophthalmology practice. I also provide cataract surgery and adult strabismus surgery. And I also have time set aside to work on research, which includes vision research and coming up with new questions and ways to answer questions about vision loss and improving quality of life for people who live with vision loss.
I'm Dr. Jovi Wong. I'm a fourth-year ophthalmology resident at the University of Toronto, and I'm hoping to be a clinician-scientist. So before medical school, I did my PhD in circadian rhythms at the University of Oxford.
Thank you all so much for being here. So your projects are all super interesting and different, and I would love if you could just take a very brief moment, I know it's difficult, but 1 or 2 minutes to describe your project for us.
So my project involves looking at the role of a protein called PIC5 within the retinal pigment epithelium. So the retinal pigment epithelium is a single cell layer within the retina that nourishes the retina and also helps the photoreceptors do their job in terms of generating neural signals. And it specifically is involved in phagocytosing outer segments within the photoreceptors every day. So the phagocytosis pathway essentially is engulfing the material from outside of a cell and then degrading those materials. And then it can, the rest of the material that doesn't get degraded could be reused again within the cells, which is the case in photoreceptors where it's fed back into the photoreceptors. And then they can reuse all of the outer segments that have gone into the RPE. So it's really important for the RPE to be able to actually do this process, the phagocytosis process. The PIC5 protein has been implicated in the phagocytosis process before in other cell lines, but it's never been implicated in the RPE. We've seen a patient who has a mutation in the gene that encodes for the PIC5 protein, and he has essentially signs of RPE stress. And so we're trying to now figure out what exactly does PIC5 do in the phagocytosis pathway within the RPE, and then how does this relate to what we are seeing in the patient as well.
So my project deals with macular degeneration, which is the most common cause of irreversible vision loss in older Canadians, and in fact, older adults around the world. And this disease is associated with a tremendous burden on patients who are at risk of blindness, as well as for healthcare systems who have to carry significant costs for the treatments for this condition. So this project is all about coming up with some ideas that may help in the future develop new treatments and new preventative strategies for AMD. And in particular, I'm looking at common clinical events that may be, as of yet, unrecognized triggers for macular degeneration progression. These events are things like antibiotic use and having different infections, like the common cold, for example. And the question is, do these common clinical events somehow kind of rewire your microbiome and your immune system that might cause progression of your underlying macular degeneration? So to answer this question, I'm going to be using data sets that include basically routinely collected healthcare data for everyone in the province of Ontario and looking at treatments for AMD and if those treatments are preceded by recent exposure to different medications or different infections. And again, this is all about coming up with really the next set of questions. What are these possible triggers that are causing AMD to progress? And then in turn, that might help us come up with new treatments and new preventative strategies.
My project is an idea that I developed following the work that I did during my PhD. And this is to look at special retinal ganglion cells, which are photosensitive, which means that those cells directly can sense light, in addition to cells we know can sense light in the retina like rods and cones. So this is a new class of cells which were discovered about 20 years ago, which can themselves sense light. And the work that was done by my PhD lab was to find out more about how they entrain circadian rhythms and the sleep-wake cycle in mammals. And so the work I'm trying to do is to find out whether circadian rhythms and the sleep-wake cycle are disturbed in patients who have optic neuropathies, because in people with optic neuropathies, we would imagine that these photosensitive retinal ganglion cells would be injured in some way, but it's still not known whether there is a real measurable disruption of sleep or circadian rhythms in people. We actually have produced some pilot data from this study, and in our study, we're looking at patients who have unilateral or bilateral optic neuropathies. So that means either one or both optic nerves have been injured. And we asked them all to wear a special wristwatch, which records their activity day to day in terms of their like sort of locomotor movement, like how much movement they have day to day, 24/7. So we know when they're awake and when they're asleep. And from that, we can extract their sleep-wake rhythms and their circadian rhythms. And then we tried to understand whether in people with bilateral or unilateral optic neuropathies, would we see any disruption? And we do see that there's disruption in their activity rest cycle and therefore their circadian rhythms in people with bilateral optic neuropathies as compared to unilateral. So just having one optic nerve can protect against circadian disruption. And I'm really excited to say that this pilot result was accepted to be presented at the North American Neuro-Ophthalmology Society, which will be in the spring.
Thank you to each of you for sharing about your projects. They all are unique and really interesting, and we're looking forward to hearing more in the future. And congratulations, Dr. Wong, on the presentation. That's very exciting as well. So just to wrap up, I would love to hear from each of you to know what is inspiring you to do vision research.
Vision is a really important sense that we have, and it's and the visual system is one of the systems that has been widely studied, yet we don't know a lot about it still. And it's also one of those systems that a lot of therapeutics have been proposed for it, but not all of them are in use right now. So this has sort of been the backbone of why I've been interested in the eye, and I'm also interested in the crosstalk between the nervous system and the visual system, as well, as I have a bit of a background in neuroscience. So this sort of is perfect for me to sort of look at the vision and the visual system and its interaction with the nervous system, and also potentially look at developing some of the therapeutics to ensure that we can cure and treat blinding eye diseases, and even think about preventing some of these things by looking at the basic mechanisms of vision.
My inspiration for vision research comes from predominantly the patients I work with. As a neuro-ophthalmologist and as an ophthalmologist in general, my day-to-day involves working with people who have either lost vision or perhaps live with a condition that threatens their vision or somehow may impact their ability to live and enjoy a good quality of life as it relates to vision. And through working with these people and seeing the humility they show and the strength they show when faced with vision loss, it is really inspiring for me and really motivates me to want to do my part, which at least in part is carrying out vision research.
I guess, as an ophthalmology resident and a future ophthalmologist, so my work is really about trying to prevent vision loss in patients. And because of my scientific interest in this as well, I'm really motivated to work on future therapies and understanding better the basis for vision loss in diseases where we don't understand that yet. And so I hope that this award will help us discover more about this area, which still remains underdiagnosed and underinvestigated.
Thank you all so much for being with us today and taking the time to tell us about your projects. Congratulations again for being the 2023 awardees of the Clinician-Scientist Emerging Leader Awards. We know you're going to do fantastic things going forward. And thank you so much to our supporters and our community who've allowed us to invest in the future of vision research.
You can see everyone now. I always love talking to the Clinician-Scientist Emerging Leader Award winners every year because they're always very young and very enthusiastic, and they've got such great ideas, and it gives a lot of hope for the future of vision research, I think.
Absolutely. I think it's really exciting, sort of being part of the process of building up that community in Canada. I think it's really important work that I'm really proud to be part of in a very small way.
I agree. Absolutely. So should we tackle some questions? Yeah,
absolutely. They've been coming in.
They've been coming in, exactly. Okay, so let's see. So let's start. I'm going to start over here in our Q&A. So Helene is asking, so earlier on you talked about wet AMD, dry AMD, and geographic atrophy. And Helene's asking, if you have wet AMD and geographic atrophy, can you still get these new injections for GA? And sort of what is that protocol versus sort of anti-VEGF treatment?
Yes. So in a short answer, yes, you can receive both anti-VEGF as well as these new injections for geographic atrophy. As Morgan mentioned, I think this might be a caveat throughout these questions. I'm not an ophthalmologist myself, but I believe the process would be very similar. It's an intravitreal injection, so I think it would be a very similar type of injection as an anti-VEGF. Whether they're done at the same time or have to be done at different times, that I'm not certain about. And for the GA drugs, they would only be given for certain patients. So it's not just because you have dry AMD, you would be getting these injections. I think they are for patients who have more intermediate or risk of advanced dry geographic atrophy. This is what these injections are for. So it would definitely be a conversation with your doctor to understand, are you going to benefit from this treatment? What's sort of the benefit versus the risk? But you can receive both of them.
Yeah, just as you were saying that, I seem to remember Dr. Hurley talking a little bit about that in our last webinar, just about, I think they're still looking at, if someone has both, how these treatments would be administered, like, is it better to do it concurrently or, so I'll just pop that link actually while I'm thinking about it in under Helene's question there for Dr. Hurley's talk, because I think he does dive into that a little bit more. Okay, next question. So there's another question here about stem cell implantation. And they're talking about IOP despite drops. I'm thinking maybe for glaucoma, like any stem cell updates in the glaucoma space.
So in general, there are a few clinical trials looking at cell replacement or stem cell therapy in the retina. I think they're currently largely for geographic atrophy and maybe Stargardt's disease. So they're looking at replacing the retinal pigment epithelial cells, so not the photoreceptor, which senses light, but the cell layer that sits underneath it that sort of nourishes the photoreceptor. So there are some early clinical trials there. They're sort of a big, I think, step forward in the field would be when clinical trials start for photoreceptor cells. So those are the cells that are lost in inherited retinal diseases. They're a really key cell in the retina. I know we had a conversation with Dr. David Gam earlier this year where he talks a little bit about some of his research, and I think there are hopes for a clinical trial moving out of that in the next few years, but currently there aren't any photoreceptor stem cell therapies or trials happening right now. And then in terms of, just because the person who asked the question talked about IOP, which is intraocular pressure, that often has to do with glaucoma. So I'm making an assumption, this might be the wrong assumption, that you were asking about stem cells for glaucoma. So in glaucoma, vision loss occurs when the optic nerve is damaged, and it's considered irreversible because currently we don't have a way to regenerate the optic nerve. So currently I don't know of any clinical trials or even pretty late preclinical work to regenerate the optic nerve, although that is a really, really large area of research. Because if we knew how to do that, there are many eye diseases where the optic nerve is damaged, where it'd be just really exciting to be able to regenerate some of that and create sight again. But we don't have any clinical trials right now about that.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Larissa. My understanding too is that like a lot of the stem cell research got very early on trying to figure out the best way to one, get the stem cells into the eye, but also getting them to kind of stick where they need to stick in the eye. And so there's some kind of bigger hurdles that they need to overcome even before it gets as specific. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's even like, so it's getting them to stay in the right place, but then also really to form those connections, because the way the light signal works is one cell creates a signal and then is passed on to multiple cells before it gets to the optic nerve, which takes the signal to the brain. So there's a lot of sort of wiring essentially that has to happen. And so if you're putting in a new photoreceptor cell or a new retinal pigment epithelial cell, is it forming the right connections with those cells to allow the signal to exist, but also to be something that we can interpret in the right way. So it's not just sort of a flash of light happening. It has to be a control signal.
Absolutely. It's such a complex, the body, right? So amazing, complex, and it's really interesting. We'll see. And I just put a link there under that question as well to the talk that Larissa mentioned with Dr. Again. That was another really great session. Um, oh, here's a good question from Camille. We had last year Dr. Dan Chung on talking about his work with Sparing Vision, which is doing sort of gene agnostic therapy or looking at looking at therapies that are not specifically tied to one gene. So Camille's asking, which research are you feeling more optimistic with, that work around Sparing Vision or some of the stuff with Kiora Pharmaceuticals, the photo switch that you mentioned earlier?
I don't know if I would say I'm feeling more optimistic about one or the other. I think they're both really exciting. They're both at relatively early stages, which is also partly why I'm hedging my bets. A lot can happen in the clinical trial space, from like a phase 1 trial all the way to a phase 3 trial. Something that looks really promising in phase 1. We've seen it happen like in every field, not just in ophthalmology, that sometimes once you start looking at more patients, it just maybe isn't quite as effective as we had hoped. But they both are looking promising, absolutely. I would say they're also in quite different spaces. So the Sparing Vision is looking more at, if I remember correctly, trying to protect cells as like a neuroprotection. So trying to keep photoreceptor cells alive longer. So try to prevent the progression of vision, where the Kiora more optogenetic space is usually for individuals who have more advanced vision loss. So they've already lost a lot of vision, so now you're trying to restore it. So I think they both serve their purpose. So for instance, if you've already lost vision, or if there is no gene-specific treatment for you and you're losing vision, something like an optogenetics in the future might be more of a useful treatment option, where I think the Sparing Vision, if it's successful, would help prevent some of that vision loss to begin with. So, ultimately, of course, you would like to be at a space where you can prevent the vision loss from happening, but knowing that we're probably quite far from that, I think it's really important to have options for individuals who are losing their vision or already have lost their vision.
Right, because for something like a gene therapy, there typically has to be a certain number of surviving photoreceptors in the eye for
Absolutely.
that work. So the idea behind the Sparing Vision work is that it's going to extend the life of those photoreceptors so that there will be something there to work on at a later
Yes.
point, right?
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
Yes. We had another question here from Kuljit, asking about the best way to get RP diagnosis and RP, and how to get genetic testing and analysis done for the same. So I can tackle part of that question.
Absolutely.
So genetic testing, it's a great question, and we've talked a lot about genetic testing in some of our past sessions as well. It is, of course, the healthcare system in Canada is sort of provincial. So there are differences depending on what province you live in. The good news is that genetic testing is typically for something like this covered across Canada. But as you mentioned, you do need to have sort of talk to an eye doctor first. There has to be suspected diagnosis, and then they can refer you to get this testing done. So on our website, and I will put a link here under Kuljit's question, we do have a series of guides that help you in your specific province kind of navigate the process because it can be a little bit complicated. So helping you figure out exactly what steps you need to take, as well as give you a sense of what the wait time is. Again, it's publicly funded, but it does take a bit of time depending on what province you're in. So if this is something you're thinking about doing, it's great to get the process started because it can take up to a year or more depending on where you are in terms of getting the testing and getting the results. And a question I get a lot of the time through health information is, can I just go to one of these other companies? You see them like Ancestry and 23andMe and all those, those kinds of questions. And I always want to caution people that those are not a medical genetic test. Those are not going to give you the result that you are looking for. Also, there are private options available, but you want to make sure that if you're getting a genetic test, you're also getting access to a genetic counselor or geneticist, somebody who can help you interpret those results. Because it's not like they're just going to hand you a paper that says you have RP. It's much more complicated than that. So having an expert who's trained in this and trained into reading those results is really a crucial part of the process to make sure that you're actually understanding what information is provided by a genetic test. And of course, there are a lot of mutations that have been identified, and we've come quite a long way in the last even 10, 15 years in terms of how many things can be identified on these tests, but there's not a guarantee that there will be something identified. So having someone in your corner to help interpret all of that, I think, is really important. So I'll put the link to that page. And of course, if you have any questions about these types of things, I highly encourage you to reach out to us through our health information line. And the email is healthinfo@fightingblindness.ca. And I'll send that and our dedicated phone number in the follow-up email today. So I do encourage you to use that service. Did I miss anything, Larissa?
Nope, that was a great answer.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's see here. We have, we're right at 4 o'clock. Okay, let's do one more question. Let me see. Let's see what other questions we haven't.
Well, while you're looking, I saw somebody had asked about cone dystrophy. And so I just wanted to point out that when I was talking about Beacon Therapeutics and them, they have a preclinical asset. So it means it's not quite a clinical trials, but they've got promising results with it. That was looking at mutations in CDHR1, which is mutated in cone rod dystrophy. And I did see there was something asking about dominant, autosomal dominant retinitis pigmentosa. There are about many genes. I think I just looked it up. I think it's about 30 different genes. One of the common ones is mutations in Rho. So mutations in Rho can cause both autosomal recessive as well as autosomal dominant retinitis pigmentosa. So some of the trials that are looking at Rho may also be applicable for autosomal dominant, but I'm not certain. I think that would be a question maybe for Health Info to look in more detail. I don't want to sort of speak off the top of my head about that one.
Yeah, we can dig into that a little bit more and find a bit more information. So maybe just to wrap up, because I know we're at time, I've seen a couple of questions coming in about, I answered one about patient registry, and there's also one about participating in clinical trials. Do you want to just give a very high level, how do people get information on patient registry and if they're interested in clinical trials?
Yeah. So as Morgan mentioned, we have information on our website about genetic testing and the patient registry and how to get involved. There are 6 sites in Canada for the patient registry. And so you can enter through there, or if you aren't close to one of those sites, we have guides of how to do it in other ways. So please go to our website for that. For clinical trials, we have a list of clinical trials on our website. There's a lot of very complicated eligibility criteria. So it's really exciting to want to be part of a clinical trial. Sometimes they restrict what your eyesight has to be like, what other conditions you have, what age you are. There could be a lot of restrictions like that, but even geographical location, they will usually try to get patients who are close to the treatment site. And then if there aren't enough patients in the close location, then they will open it up. So being in Canada, there are some sites in Canada for some of the trials, and you can be sort of invited to take part in a clinical trial that takes place in the States or internationally, but it can be a little bit more complicated because if it's in a different country. So I would say go to the clinical trials page. You can click on the links and then it tells you eligibility criteria. And of course, ask either your doctor or feel free to ask information if you've got specific questions, but definitely never join a clinical trial. I would say before talking to your eye doctor. I think that's really, really important. If you have some questions about a specific trial, you can bring it to your eye doctor or retinal specialist, and they might be able to help you understand if this trial is right for you.
Yeah, and I think something we always mention as well is that, clinical trials are not a treatment. They're still in the experimental phase. They're testing these potential therapies out. And that means that also they're looking for candidates that are going to be the best fit for what they're trying to do. So I know some patients can find it very frustrating if they're trying to look for a trial and they're not meeting these criteria, but it is very specifically designed because these are still in the experimental phase. So, but again, Health Info, happy to help you dive into those. I've been doing a deep dive on that clinical trials page and happy to help answer questions if I can about those particular trials.
Morgan, I saw one quick question. I'll do it very quickly. It was asking about the link between glaucoma and wet AMD. I'm not going to give a long answer to this. As far as I know, there is no sort of biological or genetic link between the two of them. However, if you have glaucoma and you're getting injections for wet AMD, that might be, obviously your eye doctor should know, because the eye injections have the possibility of maybe changing the pressure in your eye. So that's obviously something your doctor is going to want to know and is going to want to monitor. But both of those eye diseases are relatively common. So there are definitely a lot of people who do have glaucoma and also have wet age-related macular degeneration.
And again, if unfortunately we weren't able to answer all of the questions today, but if you do have questions, you can reach out to Health Info as well, and we'll try to answer them through that process. Thanks so much, Larissa. This is great. I didn't know if we would be talking for the full hour, and we are 4:05. We could keep going.
I
know. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and for being a supporter of Viewpoint over the past year. It's been a really fun and exciting year for us through the education at FBC, and we're looking forward to 2024. Our lineup for Viewpoint will be announced soon, so definitely keep up to date by visiting us online and signing up for our e-newsletter if you're not already a subscriber. We do have a huge resource library of webinars, and you can watch and enjoy those at your leisure. I also recommend, if you have 2 minutes, to fill out that survey that's going to pop up at the end. We'd love to hear from you and know what's working for you, and if there's anything that you think we could do better. So thanks again for joining us. I hope you all stay safe and healthy and have a wonderful holiday season. I look forward to connecting with you next year. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.